Hello and welcome to the CAP Psych Pod. I'm Kristen Davey, Operations Manager here at Capital Psychological. Today we're joined by Melissa Flatla. Melissa works with individuals ages 9 and up who have questions and concerns related to anxiety, depression, self-esteem, neurodiversity, trauma, and identity. In particular, Melissa specializes in working with the trans and gender diverse population. Melissa works with clients to co-create a space wherein they feel empowered to share their stories and move toward wellness through a lens of self-compassion. In honor of June being Pride Month, today we're speaking about all things gender identity. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to have this chat today.
Oh, wonderful. So I guess we'll just jump in. So for anyone listening who may not be familiar with the topic that we're discussing today, can you just kind of explain what being transgender is or what questioning your gender identity might mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a bit of a brief overview. So really, I'm going to start by giving some terminology. So when we think about transgender, we also need to think about cisgender. So these are often the terms that folks might hear most often. So cisgender is essentially an individual whose sex assigned at birth and their gender, so their identity, they align. And transgender, again, I'm putting this very simply, just for the sake of doing so, is someone whose sex assigned at birth and gender, so their identity, do not align. Now, there's a whole wide range of identities and terminology that I won't delve into today. I'll just give you sort of a scratching of the surface, but there's a lot more. If folks want to do some reading or watching some videos, there's a wealth of info out there. So when we talk about gender, we need to also talk about sex. So I'll be saying sex, biological sex, sex assigned at birth. I may use them interchangeably today. Essentially what that is it's a categorization that's based on somebody's external presentation at the time they're born. So a baby is born and the doctor, the nurse look at the baby, they look at their external genitalia and they place them in a category. Typically it's either male or female, although there is a third sex, so intersex. And folks may be put in that category if it's not clear where they might fall. So there's sort of a third category there. Now, this categorization, this assignment that's made at birth, really sort of shifts this trajectory for that child. Right? It changes their socialization. It gives us a little letter to put on our birth certificate and our passport. It also changes sometimes what kind of opportunities somebody has access to or how they're spoken to. And it really dictates a great deal. And all of this happens before we have any idea how somebody feels or what their identity is, because babies don't talk, so they can't tell us. So really, when I think of gender, I also think, okay, let's talk about sex at the same time so we can understand that those two pieces are in fact separate from one another. So in terms of questioning our gender identity, everybody's going to define this in a very different way. And I'm sort of prefacing the conversation with that because I think it's important to honor the fluidity of life, the fluidity of identity. We're all on various journeys at any given time. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of being alive and being human. And so whether we are looking at, any aspect of our identity, there's really no one way to be something. There's no one way to be a sibling or a parent or a teacher or a therapist. We get to decide that for ourselves. We get to define that for ourselves. And I very much think that gender is the same. We are the ones who can determine what language feels most authentic, what expression feels like it truly brings us to the forefront, how we want to be seen, how we want to be received in the world. And I think we do that with more than just gender. So it's a process we're familiar with. But when we start talking about gender, I think this is a place where people feel particularly vulnerable, especially in the current climate. So a questioning of gender identity, to me, is really something that I define as a personal journey. An aspect of our lives that many of us may go on at various points, and we may, start and return to it as many times as needed. But it's a place of curiosity and inviting ourselves to listen to our own voice. And to me, I really think of that as moving towards authenticity. So, who am I? how do I want to be seen? How do I want to present myself to the world? What feels right? And really kind of stepping into that place of vulnerability, but also liberation as we move towards feeling authentic.
Okay, that's great. And it's nice to mention too that like once you kind of figure out who you are or like how you identify, it doesn't always stay the same, right?
Exactly.
Like later in life, it can change. It's never constant.
It's so fluid, and I always make sort of the same cheesy joke. For people who don't know me, I'm very cheesy. I don't hide that, but I often think about how when I was younger, I was really invested in Pokemon. I was really into it. Now I don't know anything anymore. But for me, that was a big part of my identity in a very different way, of course, than gender. But that was a big part of my world, my identity. And it's something that I've moved away from over time. So every part of us is constantly in a state, I think, of shifting. And so we assess and reassess over time. The same can be said with gender. And some people may feel very firmly set and established in something, whereas others may move in and out of it at any given time. And both are valid and both are beautiful.
Right. Perfect. Okay, so oftentimes it can feel important for individuals to kind of put a label on themselves with regards to their gender identity or even sexual preferences. What are some tips that you would give to someone who might be feeling that pressure?
I love this question. So I really appreciate you asking it. This is something I feel I talk about so often. My first inclination here is to really want to invite folks to explore the origin of that pressure. What would having a label offer them? Where are they feeling this pressure most? Really sort of unpacking that in a sense to get a feel for whether this is something that is a value of theirs, whether it's something that holds importance in their lives versus, is this sort of a social obligation? Do I feel with air quotes, sort of need to have a label for one reason or another? And then really wanting to explore it from there. So, we live in a world that often values concrete ways of categorizing people. This is a very human thing that we do. We like to put everything neatly into boxes that we can conceptualize and easily articulate. But this, in sort of coming back to the early parts of our discussion, doesn't really align with that fluidity of life and identity. So we can come up against this resistance or this friction of sorts. So I often really want to invite folks to be curious about the origin of that pressure. And if possible, to remind them that labels are for us. They don't need to be for other people. And we're really in the driver's seat with regards to the language we use, the labels that we resonate with. And some folks will feel that it's very important to them to have a label, and others might be on the other side of that spectrum or somewhere in between. But I think being able to work towards an understanding of, where is the value for us, what is important, and how can we move toward that, I think supports that general sense of authenticity and really engages us in this process of being curious about ourselves and making space for and bringing our own voice to the forefront.
Okay, that makes sense for sure.
We have a lot of power in really determining the language that we use to talk about ourselves and our experiences and even our relationship with others. And so we can sort of reoffer that as many times as we need or want. So, reminding ourselves that there are really no rules here. So why not have some fun and try things on? And in doing so, can we shift that to a lens of curiosity rather than maybe a lens of obligation? Perhaps take some of the pressure off.
Okay, that makes sense for sure. So kind of on the same topic, sometimes it can feel kind of awkward to ask or bring up someone's preferred pronouns. How do you suggest someone can kind of bring this up in a conversation if they feel awkward asking about it?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll sort of preface this by saying too, I think this is something that is definitely a big part of conversation right now, especially as we talk more about trans rights, as we really further our own understanding from a social and community perspective. I will just say, there certainly are going to be times where we feel uncomfortable or we feel maybe we don't have the awareness or the understanding to really engage in a conversation. But if possible, I will sort of invite folks to step into that discomfort and to ask. We can ask questions, we can be curious. And sometimes that capacity to really step into that space and ask someone in the same way that we would ask their name really helps to essentially normalize asking for pronouns and sharing pronouns within a space. And it is nice in particular when cis folks can do some of that work as well, and instead of feeling like it often has to fall on a trans person's shoulders to do a lot of that legwork. But if we are feeling uncomfortable, if it is something that doesn't feel accessible in that moment, there are a few things we can do. So one thing is we can start by using sort of gender neutral language. If we're not sure of someone's gender, if we're not sure of their pronouns, this can be a relatively subtle signal that we are safe, that we are aware enough to kind of hold that space. So someone may offer up their pronouns once there's that sort of initial sense of, okay, this might be a person I can share this with. Another thing we can do is focus on visibility. So having our pronouns in our email signatures, our website bios, social media accounts, again, that's an indicator that we are aware, that we are engaged, that we're safe, that we're allies. And to me, that's sort of one of the sort of simpler, more subtle things we can do to just hold that safety for others. For me personally, I like to just start by introducing myself with name and pronouns. So I would often say, hi, my name is Melissa. My pronouns are they and she. And by doing that, not only am I offering that information to another person, but I'm also inviting that in return if they are comfortable sharing. So I think something like that could be very helpful. So when we're introducing ourselves, we can start by stating our own pronouns as an invite to the other person. Those would sort of be my suggestions on the surface. But I will really invite folks, if they're able to step into a bit of discomfort, to try asking. I mean, there's no harm in asking a question. It's certainly something that is not it's not offensive in nature. I mean, it's the same thing as asking someone for their name. So really wanting to get to know someone and showing them that we care and that we're present and that it's important to us that we refer to them in a way that honors who they are.
Okay, that makes sense for sure. It is nice that social media has started adding that to people's bios as well. I find that very helpful.
Yeah, I was just seeing it, on Instagram not too long ago. And it was really exciting to see that that's finally coming around. And thankfully, then that's having like this, this impact of spreading out into other areas, whether it's, the software we use or, when we're creating an account online, it prompts us for it. I love seeing it. I love seeing it there. And I'm so appreciative of all the folks who have gone ahead and filled theirs out.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great step in the right direction. So another question that we get a lot from parents at our office is how to talk to their kids about gender identity if they think that they might be questioning it or struggling with kind of like figuring themselves out. What advice would you have to parents of kids who are kind of going through their gender journey?
Oh, I love this one. What a rich question. So I have the benefit of working with a number of young folks. And so I'm hoping that this will be a space I can offer a bit of insight here. One of the most common remarks that I often hear, and this will be coming from young folks, but sometimes parents too, is that they can feel the discomfort around the subject coming from the other person. So sometimes one of my younger clients will say, I can kind of sense my parents tense up. I can feel that they're not sure what to say or how to navigate this. And so they almost want to rescue their parents from that space. And sometimes, right, they might interpret that too as an indication that the subject is maybe something shameful or embarrassing, and they might sort of step back somewhat. So I want to be clear that the discomfort is not inherently good or bad. It is a human experience. And I don't think it's something that we should feel we have to hide either. I actually offer the same suggestion to anyone who asks, and you'll probably hear me say these words again today, but being curious and honest, I think really strike me as important elements of any conversation, but especially one around something like identity, around gender, where historically there has been a great deal of shame and where perhaps many of us are still kind of on our own journey of learning and engaging with an ever evolving language and ever evolving information. I think just being really upfront, being clear and sort of naming or feeling confident in naming where it is that we're coming from, and being clear about our desire to be present and to learn alongside our loved one. I think it's really beautiful. It could be very beautiful to know that you've got someone who wants to accompany you along that space, who wants to be there with you and is willing to say, yeah, I don't have all the answers. I have questions of my own. And, I've got places where maybe I have concerns or I want to explore something with you, but I'm also here, right? I want to learn from you. I want to hear the language that you learn. I want to hear what you resonate with. I think it's the same thing that parents are doing with their kids around any other topic. Being present, being honest about what it is that you know, what it is that you don't yet know, and just being really clear about what your desire is and what your intention is in having that conversation with your kid. And I think that goes a long way. And often I tell folks, when in doubt, go back to the basics. Sometimes we overthink it a little bit. And truthfully, what you're doing here is probably the same thing you're doing in so many other areas. And that's being present, being honest, being curious, showing all of that love that you have for your kiddo in a really sort of direct way. I think that's a very beautiful thing. And I can tell you, I hear a lot of wonderful things about it in session. Kids who feel really loved and supported. You don't have to get everything right, and you don't have to know all the answers. They're going to tell you. They're going to give you the info.
That's awesome. Okay, so I have one last question for you. So how can allies or people that aren't part of that community, how can we best support our loved ones that are in the LGBTQIA plus community?
I knew I was going to come back to some of these words, so I'm glad I said it earlier. Again, really, I think just being curious and being present with folks is going to go a long way. Like I said, sort of coming back to the basics. I think a tendency we have to overthink is really, to me, an indication of how deeply we care. And so, being patient with ourselves as we navigate this journey alongside a friend or a family member or a colleague. We may be engaging with a material that we have had no exposure to before. We may be engaging in it when we've had exposure to material that maybe isn't the same language that the person we love is using. So to me, I think what we can do here, what often goes a long way, is listening very, very closely. What kind of language do I hear my loved one using? And can I allow them to be my guide in terms of, what I might want to do some learning about, what questions I might have, what language I'm using. And this is a tricky one, I think, but I often invite folks to try and acknowledge, if present, that fear of saying the wrong thing. I'm doing air quotes. I recognize no one can see me, but try not to fear slipping up. To me, those moments where we may say something that isn't quite the right fit, or we may, reflect back a concept and perhaps we're not exactly on the right page. These are really critical for learning, for growth. And I think they're also incredibly humanizing. When we're sitting with another person that we love and we're engaged and we're curious and we're present, we are already extending all of that care to them, right? They can see us there. They can feel that, genuine connection. The world isn't going to explode if we say something that's, maybe it's a word that they don't resonate with, or, there's a gap in our knowledge. We all have places to learn, even for myself as someone who works primarily with the trans community. And, I consider myself quite well read in terms of the material that's available. And I'm learning new things every day from my clients. And the beauty of that is we've all got our own journey and we're going to be intertwined at some point. But at the end of the day, everyone uses different language for any part of their own self-identification, whether it's gender or otherwise. And what we do in other situations is we listen, right? We listen carefully, we ask questions. And to me, it's really the same thing here. And I certainly appreciate and recognize that this can be a topic that can feel threatening or overwhelming at times. Again, I think it comes back to that almost, fierce and intense love that we have for the people in our lives, and we want to do right by them. And I think that truthfully, just coming back to the basics in a sense, and being curious and being honest are going to make a really profound difference in kind of that person's journey and in our own. Maybe take the pressure off a little bit too.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Well, I think that's all the questions that I had for you today. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think there's one thing that I hope that folks will take away from today. It's really to be kind to themselves. Whether you are navigating a gender journey of your own, or you're navigating one alongside someone you love and care about, you're not going to have all the answers. None of us ever do. I mean, sometimes we don't even have all the questions. And to me, that's part of what makes life engaging and interesting. And certainly there are moments where that is uncomfortable and overwhelming. And I imagine it is also liberating. Right. There are so many different boxes that we sort of squeeze ourselves into. And it can be such a profound, task to unravel some of what we've learned, some of what we know. The world is a whole lot more expansive than we might think. And the beauty is that we're learning more and more about it every day. So just listen to the people that are around you, be curious, utilize resources if you can, or ask for some if you're not sure where to go. It doesn't have to be, I think, this daunting task. You don't have to know everything. You're just being present in the same way that you've done all along. So I hope that we can, turn the dial back a little bit on the pressure, and for ourselves and for other people.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you so much, Melissa. This was wonderful. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours and hours. So we'll have to have you back to dive a little deeper.
Sounds good. Yeah, once I get going, it's hard to flip the switch. But thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm happy to continue the conversation at any point.
Wonderful. I will definitely hold you to that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much again to Melissa for joining us today. If anyone would like more information, or if they'd like to book an appointment with any of our therapists, please feel free to reach out at www.capitalpsychological.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.